welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Turn the Page. I am one of your hosts today, Jen, and I am joined by my coworker and colleague and friend in arms.
Hi. Wow. That is a lot of really nice accolades. Yes, I am all of those things, and I am Jessica. Nice to be here.
And we are joined by, at this point, a friend of the show who's been here. This is the third occasion. We are so excited to have him back to talk about an extremely interesting new novel and collaboration. So welcome back. Could I ask you to introduce yourself and your book today, please?
Yes, my name is Daniel Kraus. The book I'm here to talk about is called Pay the Piper, which is my second and final collaboration with George Romero, who I grew up with as my hero. He's the director of Night of the Living Dead and various other brilliant movies. And my first posthumous collaboration with him, I became involved just right after he died, was The Living Dead, which came out in 2020. And this new one, excitingly to me, has nothing to do with zombies, which is what, of course, George was most well known for, but also the thing that pigeonholed him, and he felt a little cornered by it too. So I think he was very excited to write something like this, and I was very excited to pick it up. And I guess in short, it takes place in a small, very small Louisiana bayou town called Alligator Point. And it's about the denizens there who are the ancestors of the infamous real-life pirates, the Pirates Lafitte, and how that history is intersecting with a mystical, dangerous force in the swamp that is locally known as the Piper.
I'm just going to jump in with something that I was going to ask later, but because you brought it up, the fact that, yes, so Romero, when you hear George Romero, he is basically widely known synonymous with zombies and zombie stories. So obviously it must have been really exciting for you to find this particular manuscript. In reading it and reading his approach on this type of horror story, did it change your perspective at all of him and his storytelling ability?
Well, it didn't surprise me in terms of subject or topics. Half his movies he made weren't zombie related. They just aren't as well known, although they were certainly his favorite movies, were always his non-zombie movies. And his archives at the University of Pittsburgh are just filled with hundreds of projects, virtually none of them about zombies. He just couldn't get anything. It was a struggle, particularly in his latter half of his career, to get anything made that wasn't zombie related. So in that sense, no, it didn't surprise me. And I, having been through the archive, I saw the wealth of topics and genres that he was interested in. I think the biggest surprise was really just how well written it was. The material left behind for The Living Dead was also well written, but I think there was a certain feeling of obligation with that. Like he wanted to tell a zombie story on the level that he'd never be allowed budget-wise in Hollywood. Where this was just a full-on Pay the Piper, a dive into just the stuff that he really liked. Like he had in a lot of ways, his real enthusiasms were probably his boyhood enthusiasm, because they feel like things that would have been exciting to somebody, a boy in the 50s, which were like adventure stories, Tarzan type thing, jungle stories, pirate stories, and all of that sort of thrown into the mix, sort of willy-nilly, which left me the difficult task of figuring out how the hell to tie this all up, because he essentially wrote the first half of it. So yeah, the passion and the clear fun he was having writing this was very palpable. And though I'd seen this in his unproduced scripts, it's different to read it in prose, where you can really get discursive with things and go down little rabbit holes in a way you really can't with movies.
One of my favorite things about the book was its protagonist, Pontiac, a fabulous character, and I really love her voice as well. Really, really great character. And I'm wondering, how much of that voice was already there and how much were you shaping that voice? Like, I'm curious about what the status of that character was like in the manuscript that you found versus what she became.
The character was definitely there. As with The Living Dead, these are collaborations through and through. Like if I were to just take Romero's manuscript and pick up after his last word, it's not really going to work because we just have different voices. Everyone has different voices. So what I did with both novels was figure out what our voice is once it's all blended together. Like there's a Romero voice, there's a Kraus voice, and then there's a third thing that happens when I blend our work together. And that's what this is. So yeah, the character was all there. This kind of spunk and intelligence was all there. But yeah, it's a little different through my filter, just because I am adding things and sort of synthesizing things the whole way through. So it's not going to be the exact same as you wrote it because I'm having to add stuff all the time because one issue with him in this book, which was I'm sure very fun for him but hard for me, was that he kept just adding stuff. And so, he just went wider and wider and wider and wider with it. Like it's sort of like a triangle. He started at a point, it just kept getting bigger and bigger. So to rein in some of that stuff required the same process it requires in any editing scenario. You just have to go in and you have to sort of work on the sentences. So yeah, but the character was there. All the main characters, I think every single one of the main characters was what Romero set down. I just developed them some.
I guess since you were talking about what the nature of this sort of asynchronous collaboration, if you'll call it, is with this book, it obviously must be a very different process than when you are writing something solo, but you have also done other collaborations, like you've worked on novelizations for Guillermo del Toro, for instance. And I'm wondering, like, how different is that process from this process?
Well, the books with Guillermo weren't really novelizations. They were just novels that I was there from the beginning. But yeah, it's different. Of course, it's different. It's harder. I think no book writing is easy, but the easiest form is writing alone. And then the harder form is collaborating. People, I think, have the wrong idea that if you're co-writing a novel, that it's 50% easier. No, it's like 100% harder because you're dealing with someone else's approach and thoughts and sensibilities, which I think is a good thing. I like those problems that it adds. It makes you work harder. But the hardest of all is the two Romero books I've done where the collaborator just isn't here. That requires, for me anyway, that requires a lot of external work that has nothing to do with the book, where it was mostly done with The Living Dead, where I just tried to get to his head about what kind of stuff was influencing him, like what kind of books and movies and music were influencing him, and sort of getting deep into that to try to draw from the same well he was drawing from. So a lot of that is invisible work. It's quite a bit of work, but it's not something you would really know about reading the book. So yeah, it's hard. It's hard, particularly in this book. With Living Dead, there were notes, at least. He had some notes about where some of the story was going, not all of it. With this, there was nothing. So I really had to study and analyze what was there to find the clues, and there were clues about what he was up to.
You got the voice really, just this really rich voice of Alligator Point, and just sort of that area of Bayou. Have you spent time down there? Was it a real feat to sort of engross yourself in the dialect and in all the different cultures and just sort of get the lay of the land to really feel like you nailed it?
Yeah, I haven't spent a ton of time down there, but I went to New Orleans several times, and at least once I drove as far as one can drive down to the bayou until there are no more roads. At that point, then you get in your canoes and you walk the paths, which I don't know enough people in the bayou to sort of guide me through the alligators down there. But in addition to that, clearly Romero had done his research. It was pretty clear he had been down there. It was a very expansive, sometimes lush sort of writing. Then I just did my homework. I watched anything I could, documentaries, old ones, new ones, about people in the bayou, how they spoke, how they acted, their sort of customs, and I just read everything I could that was as close to first person recounting of life down there as possible. And then I just had, I had people from the area, from the bayou, read the book and point out anything that I had gotten wrong. And there wasn't too much, but there were occasional slip ups where I would have like somebody eating a certain kind of food that's only eaten during a particular time of year or something. So there were little things like that, and then I just did my best with the Cajun, which, then I had, again, people from the area look at. So yeah, it was hard. It was actually pound for pound the hardest book I've ever written. I've got other books that are, 10 times as long that I can't say were, easier, but pound for pound, for a 300-page book or whatever this was hard. It was a book that had to go over and over and over with to try to figure out.
I remember you saying in a previous interview that we had together that when you are yourself moving from project to project, you like to make a lot of hard lefts. Like you like to do something totally different from the project that you had done before. And since this represented for Romero a big pivot, maybe of a similar nature, is that why you feel like, were you drawn to the project for that reason, or?
Yeah, certainly that helped. I mean, I would have any half-finished novel from Romero that I had found in the archives, I would have been interested in. So I don't want to overplay the specifics of this book, but certainly I was intrigued from page one. Just it was so different and had such a odd mix of influences and strange side tracks that he takes, and just so many weird things from pirates to John Wayne to all these weird things that were all kind of thrown into this strange Cajun gumbo of a book.
First of all, I love that you just described the book as a gumbo. It is probably the most perfect description one can give. But I do want to go back to when you were talking about the pirates, because that was something that I thought was very interesting. Of course, it led me to do a little bit of research on the pirates, Lafitte, and I wanted to know, was that something that you had to pick up yourself, or did Romero have a lot of that in the book already? Was that already a cornerstone of it? And how much did you have to build upon with that history?
Yeah, it was a cornerstone of what he'd written. There was a lot of stuff about the pirates in there. Again, it was a lot of setup and building up, and then it stops. So I had to, read some books on the pirates and figure out who they were, what they were doing, where was he going with this. And ultimately, I think I came up with some pretty good guesses of where he was going with it. Like they felt right to me. It's having spent some time in Louisiana, there's so many things named after the pirates that I kind of assumed, oh, these must have been good guys. And then you start reading about the pirates, you learn very quickly they were very, very much bad guys. And it's kind of shocking, but I guess shouldn't be surprising that there's towns and parks and gas stations named after them down there. Romero would not be one to discuss the pirates with an uninformed mind. He would have known exactly what he was dealing with as far as like fake pirates that you see in the John Wayne movie, Wake of the Red Witch, which is a big part of the book, versus the real pirates, the Pirates of Lafitte, who were terrible people, slave traders. And again, just more fascinating stuff to sort of analyze.
Yeah, and I have to say, I mean, even when I was doing my own research, it took a little bit more, I don't want to say digging, but like even just a few paragraphs down to get to that part of it. So it is kind of telling that even in this day and age where we have all of this information available to us, there still is almost a sanitization of the pirates and many others. So yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting.
I'm very interested in, this sort of deep reading of the manuscript as it existed that you had to do, because it must be very different from when you are reading for entertainment or for information or to engage yourself in a story or to like take yourself out of the world. But if you are reading to try and intuit somebody's intent, that's an entirely different, like almost a kind of very academic
Oh yeah.
reading. Like what was that like, and how many times did you have to like I'm just really curious about like a sort of mind reading across time.
Yeah, it was really interesting process. I took the book, of course, I read it a few times, the manuscript, and then I broke it into pieces in my writing program, Scrivener, so I could see each sort of section by itself and That way I could isolate them and move them around a little bit if I needed to. But there were so many peculiar things in this book that they begged to be analyzed. Like in the book, in his manuscript, even more so, was so much about this movie, Wake of the Red Witch, John Wayne. There was this whole segment. He spends like 40 pages in the manuscript recounting the plot. It's just I don't know why he did it. And it's like, I couldn't keep 40 pages of a plot synopsis, which is the most bizarre thing I've ever run across in a manuscript. But I could keep this sort of importance to why he kept talking about it. So like that was a place to start. Like, watch that movie. You start learning about that movie. Where was he going with this? And he's got a character who's obsessed with John Wayne. So I started reading John Wayne biographies. And so this is one example. But like when I got to the end of one of the John Wayne biographies and learned that he called his cancer the Red Witch, that was a huge eureka moment for me. I was like, oh, so even though this movie has been forgotten by almost everyone, it was really important for John Wayne because he used the title to describe his cancer that eventually killed him. And then other pieces started coming together. I was like, okay, this is sort of a book about cancer, which is not clear on the surface of the pages you've written. But once you sort of clue into it, so you could start seeing how this was kind of a book about cancer and other things as well. And you would start making every clue I would uncover would point to a new clue. And I could start to pull together a really interesting trajectory of what he was doing. Like I could see that, oh, this word he's using for the monster in this book is really a form of this other word that means something else. And it's like, oh, had I been able to have a conversation with him, he could have just told me this all in 5 minutes. Instead, it took 5 months to figure it out. But there's a lot of stuff that was baked in. It just had to be studied.
I guess on a similar note, I guess, you had mentioned earlier that you had been watching his films since you were young. And I'm wondering if, going this deep into his works and into his imagination, has that clarified for you at all, maybe the specific ways in which he influenced you as an artist, or like has working so closely with his own work clarified that relationship for you at all?
Yeah, it has. I mean, as a kid, it was really, I'm talking about as a kid, like not even teenager. It really was just Night of the Living Dead. It was the only thing I saw over and over. And then as a teenager, it was probably some of his other zombie movies. It wasn't until I got beyond that I was really seeing the sort of depth of his work. But yeah, like the more I learn about him, and I've continued to, especially over the past year, topic for another time. But I have, there's certain consistencies and beliefs he had that either by circumstance or by influence via his work, somehow I am very simpatico with his views on things. Like I could have been his son almost. Like we just like we're just in lockstep on a lot of how we see the world. It comes as a second nature to me to sort of work on stuff he's left over. There's nothing else, so there's not really anything else we'll be doing in the future. But it has gotten easier. Easier is probably not the word. I've trusted myself more as I've gone along because he's influenced me. So I think so much that it's almost just like in my DNA now. We are working along the same threads of thought, and we have the same issues that we like writing about. We're concerned about the same things. It comes very natural.
Wow, that's been super fascinating. And I'm so glad that you shared this book with us. Thank you so much. And I know
Yeah, thanks.
there's lots of stuff on your horizon. I know about one project in particular about World War I that I am so excited about. What are you working on right now?
Bunch of stuff. I have so many projects coming up. I don't know where to start. Well, I can only talk about two of them, so I'll start with those two. Yes, Angel Down is a book that comes out fall 2024, and it's I don't know what genre you'd put it in, but it's about a group of World War I soldiers who find an angel who's been shot out of the sky accidentally, and sort of what they do with this angel and how, although it's this miraculous being, the fact that they all want something from it sort of begins to tear them apart. And then a year away from that, so we're talking fall 2026, is my first sci-fi book called The Sixth Nick. that's coming out from Saga, and that's it's sci-fi, but it's probably the most horrifying thing I've ever read. It's boy, I don't know how to talk about that one yet. I have no short elevator pitch, but it's just look it up. There's some information online, but I don't know how to talk about it yet. It's a very dark, kind of Cronenberg-esque sci-fi novel, but it's like full-on sci-fi, like it's spaceships, alien planets, all that kind of stuff.
Well, I think the best pitch for any sort of space spooky book is like, it's unspeakable. we cannot talk about it.
Yeah.
That's great.
This one really is. Yeah.
I really do think that sci-fi lends itself to horror in a way that a lot of people don't necessarily expect it to. So I'm looking forward to that.
Oh yeah, these are among my two favorite things I've ever done. I love both of these books coming up so much. So I'm very excited.
Thank you again for joining us. And don't be surprised if we poke you again for Angel Down, because I'm very excited to read that one.
Yeah, I'm so excited. So I'd be happy to come back. Just let me know.
Yay. All right. Well, thank all of you listeners for joining us. This has been Jen and my co-host,
Jessica.
And we've been talking to Daniel Kraus about Pay the Piper. By the time that you hear this, it will be out in the world. So please head over to your favorite library, perhaps, or independent bookstore, or wherever you like to go for your books. Yeah, go do it. You won't regret it. All right. Thank you for joining us. It is now time to close this chapter.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.